Like same on Instagram and Snapchat. I would argue that like their biggest secret is that people care far more about their own stuff than they care about everyone else's. And so we saw the same thing. And so what everybody was doing is they were building these network like companies that were like upload your video clip. And then we were like, no, you got to go deeply personal by building the capture layer and then expanding from there.
And then this was before TikTok wasn't a thing.
TikTok was not a thing.
What happened? How did you blow up? Welcome to The Peel, where we explore the world's greatest startup stories. I'm your host, Novak, founder of Banana Capital, and also champion of my school's unofficial Halo 3 tournament my freshman year of college. Today, I talked to Pim de Witte, co-founder and CEO of Metal. Metal is how tens of millions of gamers capture and share their favorite gaming moments with friends. Metal is one of the largest consumer startups that you've probably never heard of before. We talk about why people play video games and why Roblox is at the forefront of the industry with over 200 million active monthly players. We discuss why paid user acquisition is so important in mobile gaming and why consumer platforms need some sort of social inflection point and what that was for Metal. We talk through multiplayer platforms dying when their network effects unravel, why Metal's seed round was so hard to raise, Pim's biggest mistakes building Metal, why they no longer allow every employee to work remote, how Metal acquired 6 other companies, and why rapid iteration is everything for startups. Thanks to David at Dune for sharing questions, and thanks to Pim for coming on. Now, let's jump in after a short word from SecureFrame. Longtime listeners know SecureFrame is the automated compliance platform built by security experts. And in fact, you all know this so much that hundreds of you have already clicked the link in the show notes to sign up for a demo. I want to thank everyone for supporting SecureFrame, which indirectly supports the show. If you're not familiar with SecureFrame, thousands of customers like Ramp, AngelList, and Coda trust SecureFrame to get, stay, and automate their compliance with security and privacy frameworks like SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, and GDPR. If you look through their website, I'm not exaggerating when I say if you need to figure out any sort of compliance or security framework, it's very likely SecureFrame can get you compliant in as fast as 2 weeks. This means more time focusing on your own customers. I'm an investor in SecureFrame, and I highly recommend it to every founder I meet. Check the link in the show notes, and SecureFrame's in-house team of compliance experts and former auditors will get you set up with a demo. Thank you, SecureFrame. And now let's talk to Pim at Metal. So I thought we could kind of kick things off. Can you really quick give us kind of a high-level crash course on gaming as a market, how big it is, why is it interesting, all that kind of stuff?
When you're a kid, you can choose between, spending time playing out any scenario you can imagine with your friends in a digital world versus scrolling a feed that's going to give you entertainment. And I think most people pick the first one because it's more fun and more interactive and friendships are made, right? Like inherently, it's kind of ironic that these social networks that are, claiming to be quote unquote social, it's actually way more social to drop in and do something with your friends inside a video game than it is to scroll a feed in isolation. And so what we try to do is we try to enable people to capture, edit, and share the memories they create with friends while they're playing video games.
A way to think about it then would be 20 years ago, someone might play outside at the park, and maybe an equivalent of that they still play outside of the park, but something they maybe also do today is playing with a friend who lives across the city or across the country or the world online together.
Exactly. I would say it doesn't necessarily replace it, but it does give people the ability to do that regardless of where they're located. Our mission at Metal, one of the things we say is like, we think that Metal is inherently good because it creates a more connected world where you can have friends all over the planet, right? I think it creates a level of understanding that people have about each other that transcends things like beliefs and things like that. And so I don't think it replaces playing outside. I think inherently it just removes the location element from doing things with your friends.
And I remember too, even when I was growing up in high school, I probably met just as many friends in class, and at school as I did first playing a game like Call of Duty or Halo with them. And then we would hang out at school or in person.
In my case, it was very similar. So I have Tourette's. So for me, it was tough to make friends at school. I have a lot of good friends that I have from that period. But for me, I was always kind of like the oddball. It's like, you can still kind of see it. Like I twitch my eyes sometimes. With games, there was no barriers. I was just like everyone else. Right. And so I think, for you, it's a adjacent place. For me, it was the place. Right. It was where I didn't feel different.
I would actually say for me, it was probably the place. Maybe they were.
Oh, interesting.
I played a lot of like Halo growing up. I played a lot of Call of Duty, Gears of War, those kind of games.
Nice. Cool.
I made a lot of friends in high school, like I said, through gaming. And what would you say is the big title for that right now? Is it Roblox? That's kind of what I hear.
Definitely Roblox.
Can you explain to us what Roblox is and how big is it?
Roblox is essentially like a virtual sandbox. It lets you create any type of game you want and invite your friends to come play it. But that can be 5 friends or, 50,000 friends. And it allows you to monetize and, as these experiences get to scale. I think the reason why it's doing so well compared to the rest of the market is, one, they're cross-platform, right? So if you study network effects, one of the predominant factors that determine whether something is successful or not is K factor. And if you look at the K factor of Roblox versus other games, the fact that Roblox is literally everywhere makes it so that they are able to capture a much wider audience than most other games. So like primarily mobile, I would say is, they are really one of the only companies that have really, really nailed that mobile to PC loop. And I think a lot of companies just haven't done that yet. And if you have both mobile and PC, you have a lot of the most social gamers. And so I think the loop that drives Roblox just like runs faster than most other games. The other thing that's going on with Roblox, which is really interesting, is that COVID drove a really, really large slowdown of content production across the games industry. That didn't happen with Roblox because it's just people making these games. And so if you think about it, with content becoming increasingly stale, the largest large multiplayer games release that got like more than 10% market share on Metal was Valorant, right? And so realistically, content is delayed because of COVID. And so as a result, we're seeing Roblox that's where the freshness is at now. Mm-hmm. Roblox and GTA 5.
Roblox is essentially most of the people, quote unquote, creating content. They basically create games that you play, and it's mostly kids, right?
Yes.
What's an example of a game? Like, I'm just trying to give somebody an idea of when you play a game on Roblox.
Yeah, so it can range like Neopets. You basically raise like pets with your kids or with your friends. Or there's FPSs, they're kind of like CSGO. Most popular games have a version of them in Roblox. One of the more recent trends is this game called Only Up, which is essentially is like an infinite, well, not infinite, there is an end, and this is a game that goes mainstream regularly as a standalone, and then Roblox users catch on and they make their own versions of it, right? Also very popular on Fortnite Creative now. So you're kind of seeing this shift into games being these like trends that fade in and fade out. And I think like in a way, Roblox is like the TikTokification of games, where attention spans, the amount of time that people are actually willing to invest in a specific game loop before they're sold is pretty low. And so they play on Roblox, and then if they're not into it, they'll go play something else. And if they are into it, like they're like soccer, for example, is a very popular Roblox game. You might have some friends there that then transition into like professional FIFA or whatever. I look at Roblox as kind of like TikTok for games, because the retention like on the tail end of these games is pretty low.
But there's always new ones coming out, right?
Yeah. There's always new stuff. I mean, definitely moves quicker than traditional games industry, but people do still flock to like the main ones. But like the tail end retention is, single digits percentage. People come back on day 30 versus like day 1. And so what you see is that these games, they are like TikToks. They are pieces of content that people consume. And then once they're done with it, they're done with it. And I'm sure there's exceptions, but that's really what's happening in Roblox. And I think like most industry hasn't really caught up with that yet.
So it's almost like a way to think of Roblox is it's sort of its own game engine.
Yes.
In a way, it's almost it's a game, but it's almost its own platform that other people build games on top of.
It absolutely is.
Yeah. And how many people use it now? Is it 40, 50, 60 million?
And don't quote me on this. I believe they have 100 million daily active users in that range.
Wow.
That's, give or take. Yeah.
That's huge.
It's like somewhere between 50 and a million at the moment. I have to check.
And then you talked about Roblox has a really good loop. What exactly does that mean?
Okay, so if I'm playing a game on Xbox and it's an Xbox exclusive, and I try to invite my friend who doesn't have an Xbox, then they're not going to be able to play my game, right? You see this with like GTA 5, for example. They don't have a mobile client, right? And so very, very popular on PC, but they don't get to Roblox scale probably because there's no way somebody from mobile can actually access that, right? And so an optimized loop lets people play where they want to play. If you then, if you think about it, out of every 4 friends you invite, if only one of them can play, then your game is hypothetically going to grow at 25% of what it really could be growing at, right? Because you're inviting 4 friends. So Roblox is an optimized loop in the sense that the places where people want to play, they generally have a way to play.
It feels like they've done a good job with content on other platforms. Like people will make videos about a game that they made in Roblox, which will then drive more people to play Roblox as a whole, right?
Yes, exactly. Because it's low, the barrier to entry to create is so low. People will just create and then talk about it and see if it sticks versus game studios who spend millions of dollars building something without knowing if it's going to work.
And like we talked about, it's literally going to be like a 13-year-old kid just
Yep.
makes a game that millions of people play.
And it's hosted by Roblox, it's scaled by Roblox. It's kind of magical.
Which I guess switching topics a little bit, that's sort of what you did back in the day. I think you were 13 or 14. You had a private RuneScape server. Can you, I guess, first explain what that is for people who don't know, and then just talk about what that whole business was?
Yeah, so what it is RuneScape, the original game, was written in Java. And so what that means is that they were distributing the client through Java applets on web, which are executable jar files, which you're able to reverse engineer and basically turn into your own version of the game. Like, let's say World of Warcraft, you could go in and you could like look at the code, right? Not literally, you can because like it is heavily obfuscated, but you could technically. Like, it's much harder to do with games that weren't written in Java. There was a huge community. This wasn't something that I did, personally. There was a community of people that were really into reverse engineering the RuneScape client. And at some point, we went from, we can modify this thing into, what if we actually build our own server that corresponds to these things that we can do in the client and basically have the whole thing?
So you sort of like took the existing just like world and you just split it into your own version that wasn't controlled by the company that owned RuneScape, and you almost had your own?
Yes. So it has to be very clear. There are different versions of this. There is like definitely not supposed to do that. This was definitely in that. Definitely, Minecraft is encouraged, right? Because on Minecraft, you're connecting to the servers through the official client. Whereas with RuneScape, there was no functionality for that. It was, we distributed the clients that people would go and play with. So you're to be clear, you're definitely not supposed to do this. But I was 13 years old. I was really, really pissed off that RuneScape removed my favorite part of the game, and I really wanted that back. And so I was extremely motivated to go and do that.
What did they remove?
The wilderness. There's two punches. There was the wilderness and free trade, which was basically, I really loved the economy part of the game, and they basically removed the ability for me to go kill other players for their items, or for me to go trade and merch items. And so that was the whole game for me. And so I kind of wanted that, right? And so I discovered this private server scene. And then I got really into private servers, playing them. And then I tried to make a few, got like super addicted to coding, basically got as addicted to coding as I did to video games.
Really?
It was like magic to me, right? Like, you can kind of imagine, like, I'm a kid with Tourette's in school wondering, like, am I going to get a job? Is anyone going to hire me? And then I discovered this world of people making tons of money doing this thing called coding, and you never even have to talk to people. You know what I mean? Like, so for me, this was like the thing. And so, yeah, I would skip school and code, and I would code literally all day, every day.
And you were in 8th grade, 9th grade.
I think this is when I was like 13 years old. Yeah. So
wow.
in the Dutch version, I was in groep 8, which is 8th grade-ish.
So you basically learned how to code so that you could build your own server.
Yes, that's correct. And it's very common. A lot of kids, that's how they learn how to code, but that's how I started too. In addition to that, like, I was into websites and stuff. So I was like designing websites for people at school and selling them. I was basically doing designs in like Photoshop and then exporting them to Dreamweaver, and then exporting them from Dreamweaver to like usable HTML/PHP. And then I would sell them to people at school. So I was into all the different ways of code. And then obviously private server took off, so I didn't end up working much more on selling websites. But yeah, I was built obviously the private server website and things like that and maintained that.
You've said before you had just a desire to build things that people used. What do you think drove that?
I don't know if I could pinpoint a specific thing. I just loved building stuff and then people loving what I built. I don't think that there is a recognition of that you're building things that people like. I think was very, like, again, as somebody who didn't get a lot of recognition from peers as a kid, right? Because again, I was in school. I wasn't exactly the popular kid in school. So I think as a kid, I was looking for a lot of peer recognition. And I think probably building products gave me a lot of peer recognition at the time.
I mean, as weird as it is, you almost get a lot of social capital from being good at gaming in some cases.
Yeah, I think in my case, so what happened, which is pretty funny. So RuneScape got so popular that all the schools, they banned the IP addresses and websites of RuneScape.
In
And
school, so you
so
couldn't play
in
in class.
schools, yeah.
Okay.
But you could play my server. So what happened, like one
Mm.
of the big reasons why my server became so popular is because we kept the memory limit and like usage of CPU really, really low so it could run on school computers. It would run on like
Oh, okay.
50, 150 megabytes of memory. What happened is you could embed that in a web browser in a Java applet, and people would play my server instead of playing the main game. So I've actually had scenarios like I've been beaten up at school, not really like it wasn't hurt that bad, but they wanted items in the game
Wow.
where they were basically threatening me like, give me items. On the other hand, people just come up to me and is like, oh, read a guy that built a server. I love to play it and prove it to me. I don't believe you. Like you're lying. Like it's really funny. Like, and as a teenager, that's amazing, right?
And you got it up to like 1.5 million in revenue. What were people paying for? Did they pay for access or items or something?
Well, I think in the downside of an economy is that you lose sometimes, right? So people would buy items, they would sell them. If they died in the wilderness, they would buy more items. There was memberships. I had a lot of different ways. I even had like ads on the web player where like if you played on the website, I would monetize with Google AdSense, for example. All these different ways of making money.
And then when someone bought, what did you use to facilitate the transactions back in the day? Was this like PayPal probably?
No, so you couldn't because it was a high risk vendor. So as a private server, I wasn't allowed to transact with like traditional payments platforms because we would be considered high risk. So we actually had to go through what they call merchant of records, which is basically what they do is they blend a whole bunch of companies like high risk and low risk. So their average risk profile is lower. And so as long as you stay under a certain amount of chargebacks, they'll keep working with you. Yeah. So we had a number of different payment providers. So not around anymore today.
I wonder why.
No, I mean, there's still merchant of records. By the way, like there's not inherently this model, I think, worked fine because what they do is they do kick out the ones that are actually very risky, right? So they basically keep a baseline profile. And I think they might also have like their own merchant bank where like they go and they work with a bank that is high risk. But like inherently, you have to stay under a certain amount. But that's how we got payments processed. We got up to $1.5 million in revenue when I was about 18 years old. And I mean, we lived in Netherlands, so taxes and everything's really high. But it was like for an 18-year-old, that's great, right?
And you had some employees that you paid to, right?
Students, yeah. So we had like the cool student job was working for my private server. We had like an office right next to university within 10 minutes or so. And then they would just bike and they would check in as a support agent or as like a safety specialist or as like a technical help person. And they would make money by the hour and then go back to school. Very little full-time people. I had like 4 full-time people and the rest was just like students that worked by the hour.
So then what is sort of the final outcome for a business like that? Did you eventually just wind it down? Did you sell it? Or how does that work?
We wound it down. One, I turned 18, which means I'm actually liable for stuff I do. And
okay.
and two, so before that, like, you know, no one's gonna, if you're under 18, realistically, I wasn't really worried about it. When I turned 18, you know, I started talking to a company that runs RuneScape, and you know, eventually we decided that it was best for us to shut down. So we tried a bunch of things, worked for a little while, and then after a while decided that shutting down was the way to go. So I want to say it was 2015 or so.
Okay.
8 years, yeah, in the summer.
And then that was around the time I think you started doing some hackathons.
I knew it was going to have to shut down, you know, a few months in advance. And so I started figuring out what I wanted to do next. It was like private server was good money, but at the same time, it was like, again, living in the Netherlands, I made good money, but not nearly as much as people think I did.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I was like, yeah, I want to figure out, like, do I go to college or get a job? I had a good amount of money saved up. So I was like, yeah, I can kind of just go do whatever I want right now. And so somebody at Dr. Without Borders, who I had placed, like, I think I placed second. I think I technically didn't win the thing. They kept in touch. They called and they were like, hey, we have this problem with local network infrastructure, which is very similar to the private servers you used to work on. Can you come solve it with us? Which was during Ebola. So I ended up going to Dr. Without Borders to work on this problem and liked it so much that I stayed for almost 3 years.
So this was kind of 18 through 21-ish?
No, this was 15 through 18. And towards the end of that, my co-founders and I from SoulSplit. So the company was technically founded in 2017. We started like tinkering with making games. And then towards we released a mobile game that we built and we self-funded it. It was just like our own money. Mobile game failed.
And you tried to raise money for the game or something?
Yeah, and we actually ended up raising $150K at a $1 million valuation. At the time, it was all we could get. Like nobody was funding what we were doing.
Why did no one want to fund it? I mean, you had obviously built some pretty cool stuff.
Well, I think part of it is I was just a super random kid from the net. I like remind you at the time, like I was 20 and I didn't really know how the world worked. So I didn't know there was Y Combinator. I didn't know there was VCs. I had tried emailing a bunch of VCs, but like nobody really responded. I reached out to some people in the Netherlands who I knew through mutual contacts from running the private server, and they introduced me to some of their friends, and they ended up doing 150K. Yeah, it's pretty funny. They're like, we still have them on the cap table, and they were the first people that bet on us, but they were very happy.
Were you kind of still at Doctors Without Borders while you were working on Metal?
So the Doctors Without Borders projects, they were set budgets. So like I had a budget to deliver this project, which was, in this case, this project was 50K. And I knew that Doctors Without Borders is a charity, right? So we delivered the project and it was doing well and started picking up work on my game after like the project. So it got taken over by Heidelberg University, which is a popular university in Germany, specifically when it comes to GIS work, which this was qualified as.
That's like mapping, right?
GIS mapping, yeah. So we got like a very good home for it. Everybody felt pretty comfortable. I started working on the game with my co-founders and built the game, shipped the game. Day 1 retention was great. Day 7 retention was terrible.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, because like what we find out is that like you need player liquidity to like hold people engaged, right? And so we were hoping that would happen organically, but what we found out is that with mobile games, session lengths are so low that that's actually really hard to do without paid spend, where you push people at these similar times. We just didn't have the money for that.
Okay, so in gaming, the strategy is typically like you need to spend a bunch spurts to just get a bunch of people at the same time.
Or at once, yeah, but generally spurts. Because the problem is that when you get a bunch of people that are really good at the game, they'll beat everyone who's bad at the game and they'll all quit. Right?
Oh no. Okay.
So you need liquidity if you're building a competitive game, you need player liquidity at each of the levels, right? And the problem is that there's no actual levels, right? Because it's like people's level is a skill at the game. And so the amount of player liquidity that you need to actually build a successful competitive game is massive, which is why it's so rare. And so, this is why when I see like game pitches for like competitive games, it's very tough to say yes to because this problem in particular.
And you kind of started Metal as a way to solve that problem, right?
Exactly. So our theory was we get a bunch of people to watch video clips on the platform, and then we send a push notification that our game is live a few times a day. Metal got so many downloads that we ended up deciding that Metal was the bigger opportunity. Our thesis was, okay, like we could build this large gaming platform, and eventually, if it has enough layers, we can go always launch games anyways. It kind of felt like a more organic way to do things. So we pivoted, and that's kind of the start of where we are today.
Maybe we can kind of talk through then the Metal journey, but I'm just curious, as of today, what is Metal? Like, how do you describe it to someone in just like a sentence or two?
Yeah, so Metal is a camera for digital environments. Like this is what we're really good at. Whether that's a PC game or like a VR chat environment, for example, right? Like we try to be really good at capturing whatever meaningful thing is happening on your screen. Then there's a whole platform behind that where you can share what you captured. You can edit it. You can tag your friends. You can message your friends about the thing that just captured. And then we figured out that when you actually capture these moments, it's then very meaningful to connect the people that were in these moments. And so as of last year, we're now also really good at recommending who else was in the moments that you captured and therefore building a social graph on the platform, which then let people follow each other and you can see the moments they capture, etc.
Okay. So it's almost like you've, instead of like Facebook for your real photos with you're getting tagged from your friends, or Instagram where you're posting and you're showing a feed of pictures from someone's camera roll on their phone, Metal is entirely moments from, like you said, within Roblox or within a certain game that they might be playing on their phone, on their computer. Do you guys have Xbox and PlayStation and different consoles yet?
Xbox and PlayStation both have native video capture functionality, which you can just import through the mobile app. And we do have an integration with Xbox specifically, which lets you pull directly from your Xbox. With PlayStation, not yet, but it's quite easy because they all have these moments in their mobile app. You can just share them straight to Metal. So I would say for mobile and PC, we're capture. For console, we're one step further in the funnel. We're more like editing and sharing.
And obviously you didn't start there. So what did you start with initially, the very first Metal concept?
We started with a mobile app that would pull all the top clips from Reddit, just show them in a dedicated environment.
Why did that work? Because you could just go on Reddit, I guess, right?
It was more noisy and you had to go into individual subreddits. Like at the time, they didn't do as good of a job yet merging the highlights from the different games. It wasn't,
Okay.
and I think we also included some other sources. Like, for example, we had a Discord bot that people could go and submit their own clips. So we built this like Reddit and Discord integrated video consumption product that people downloaded, but they didn't really stick with. Like we got a lot of downloads. Like I think we got like 1,000 downloads a day. However, what we found when we actually talked to those people is that they weren't posting consistently because they didn't have a way to capture consistently. It was very hard to go from a game to a short video. And looking back, that was because all those recorders were built for long recording. All of them are built for either live stream or YouTube at the time. Like nothing was built for short form. I think actually largely this is still the case. Most recorders are built. Yeah, most recorders, like OBS now has some functionality to make it easier to export. Like most platforms are making it easier, but most capture software is inherently built for long form. And so we learned from our users that it was really difficult to capture short form, and we made it easier for them to capture short videos and send it to their phone.
And then this was before TikTok wasn't a thing.
TikTok was not a thing. Yeah, so there were two things that happened that blew us up, Fortnite and TikTok.
So what happened? How did you blow up?
I mean, everybody all of a sudden needed like easier ways to capture short form video. And Fortnite in particular is super clippable, right? You know, constantly experiencing cool moments. COVID, obviously, Fortnite COVID is like your friends for an entire generation of high schoolers. Their junior and senior year, they're 100%. If they weren't seeing friends, like they're on metal, right? Like that's where you have your memories because you were playing games together. It was a combination of Fortnite, TikTok, and COVID that really led to the platform blowing up.
You guys are still going.
Yeah. We're still growing despite COVID unwinding, which is nice.
That's honestly, I mean, that's kind of rare. I mean, there's a lot of people who the trends were just too hard against them that they couldn't fight through it.
The cool thing about Metal is that it's a really good single player experience. So if you look at companies that ended up trending down, a lot of it was because they were very good multiplayer environments, but they were not good single player environments. Because Metal is inherently that like capture motivation, capture, edit, share. Those are inherently single player behaviors. Instagram, by the way, Kevin Systrom said the same thing about Instagram before. Build a good single player environment and figure out how to turn it into multiplayer environments. If you have only a multiplayer environment, naturally, when that network effects start shrinking, your platform dies, right?
It's like your liquidity of content, posting, browsing, viewing.
The time at which, like, look at Facebook, right? The time at which it took Facebook to become irrelevant after the core people started leaving was very, very low. It wasn't a very long period because there was nothing interesting on Facebook anymore. And so a few other platforms have the same problem post-COVID, obviously, but we didn't because it is inherently a single player behavior. Now, games do have that problem, which means we do see the aftermath, right? Because games that are inherently multiplayer, they are going to go through these network effects shrinking. But for the most part on those games, we saw them transition more into like a weekly habit as opposed to a daily habit. And then there's other games like Roblox that didn't have that problem.
And then you kind of almost benefit from the ebbs and flows of different games. Like you're like a shock absorber. Like maybe for a couple months, Valorant, Rocket League, Minecraft is popular, but then Roblox takes some share and they're still on Metal. And you kind of benefit from like gaming time spent as a whole in a way.
Any like consumer or mass consumer platform that had like an organic go-to-market, you can tie almost all of them to this thing called like a social inflection point. Like Nextdoor is tied to when you buy a new house or move into a new neighborhood. Twitter is tied, and Telegram are both tied to major world events. Slack is tied to when you go join or build a new project. And so Metal is tied to new games. I think, yeah, these are definitely inflection points for us. These are what drive all our organic growth, and they're very good for us.
Were you still doing all this on 150K, or was there another point where you just needed money? Or
we raised our seed round, I believe, 2018.
Was that shortly after you launched or a little bit after?
Shortly after we launched Metal, yes.
Nice. What was that process like? Was it a little bit easier?
No, because we were splitting our focus. We hadn't decided to pivot yet. Like we were working on Metal, we were also still working on the game. So our story was pretty unclear. So my first raise was actually pretty hard because like we weren't really sure which one we were going to do. And obviously, like as a company, like we had been trying to raise for a long time, so it wasn't really working. I think I have the sheet somewhere. It was like 87 meetings and one yes that ended up doing it. And then that one yes ended up turning into obviously a lot more yeses. But yeah, it was hard.
Do you know like what was the thing people were buying into? Did they really like the thesis? Did they just really buy into you and the team?
In retrospect, they've told us that they bought into us as a team, but at the time, it definitely felt like they were pretty invested in the products that we were building. But I think that's normal for a founder. I think think it's just an ego thing. Like I thought they liked the products, but they liked us. Yeah.
It's really interesting. Like a lot of people have different opinions on this, and I try to form my own opinions, but it's always like sometimes you're more influenced by the founder. You're like, she's just gonna figure something out, or it's that product's just so good. Like you know that the founder's passion or intellect or drive is like being reflected in how good the product is. So it's hard to really tie it down, but I think it does usually come back to it usually comes back to the founders. That's how you build a good product, is it's through the team. Okay, so you raised a C round. What were you using the money for? Were you guys like doing a lot of customer acquisition? Was it hiring the team to like build product? Like at what point then did you decide to kind of go all in on this clip thing?
Yeah, I mean, we were trying a bunch of stuff. Like we obviously had to build a team because we wanted to. Building a video platform is surprisingly hard. There's a lot to it, especially if you're trying to do recorder, mobile app, website, desktop app.
So what all did you try?
So we started off as just a mobile app, and then
Yep.
we built a recorder on PC. And then we had to, obviously the recorder worked, so we had to build a desktop app for the recorder. And then people wanted the mobile app to go along with their clips because they wanted to view their stuff when they were at school, right? And show their friends. Then we had to build a mobile app. And then eventually mobile app became very popular for also viewing content. So then we initially built the mobile app in JavaScript. That was actually one of my projects. I made the like mobile version and then eventually hired an engineer to maintain it. But then we decided to go native. So yeah, we ended. It was a very expensive and like long company to build to get like to a really good product quality. But yeah, so that's what we used most of the money for. And then we tried paid user acquisition for 2 years, and then we didn't need it anymore.
So were you mostly, in terms of all these different features you were adding, how did you know what to do? Were you just talking to users?
Talking to users and using the product, to be honest, like playing games and then finding every little annoyance that you find and then fixing it. For us, like if you think about it, like taking a clip and sharing it really quick is not that complicated of a use case. Like it's something that you could very easily test yourself on a bunch of low-end devices and see if it works well. Most of it was just us using the product ourselves and then fixing it up and then shipping, when we had updates.
Was there any times where you're like, holy shit, this works? Like this is actually a real company.
I mean, at some point we hit 10,000 videos captured per day, which right now we're at 3.5 million, which is like, that was the big moment for us. It was like, whoa, people are capturing like 10,000 of these moments. And then they were uploading like 5,000 of them or something. So we were like, this is really like, people are doing this. And I mean, we had pretty high conviction at that point. We were seeing like good, both organic and paid installs.
Were there any pieces that were breaking, like things that didn't work or were like you needed to plug holes or?
For sure. I mean, I wrote the first version of the backend. That was just like at some point queries were just timing out and we had to write a new version because mine was too scrappy, frankly. So we had to hire a better backend engineer to build a better version of the backend. The mobile app was written in JavaScript, right? So we took a lot of the code from that and turned it into the desktop app because we had like the account system and all these things we had already built. And so the desktop app was like a copy and paste of the existing mobile app that we had. And then with the desktop functionality built around it, which initially was like a very bad architecture. So we had to do a lot of things to get out of that. They say like growth solves everything. And like, honestly, that's true. Like, unless your growth is unprofitable and it will eventually kill you, which you and I have seen,
We've seen that.
then it will actually solve all problems. As long as you're growing, it's easier to recruit. It's easier to find investors, get the best talent. That is really the main problem to solve. And we had that. We always did, which is really nice.
Yeah. And I mean, talking about recruiting, I think you've mentioned before that every single employee you had at SoulSplit, your RuneScape server, now works at Metal. That's true?
It's most of them. I wouldn't say it's every single one of them. All the ones that we had the opportunity to work with, we worked with. And I wouldn't say it's like 60 to 80% of them. So definitely a majority. But when you like working with people, why not do it again? Like my partner at my private server, Josh, is now a CTO at Metal. We grew together, like we grew up together, right? And so I think in a way, it was kind of interesting because like my private server, I was the person really calling the shots because it was my private server. But this was like the first time that we actually collaborated and did it together, which created a very different dynamic, which has been really good. So yeah, it's all the talent from the private server, we brought them in together to do this one. And yeah, it's turned out great.
Do you have a strategy for hiring do you have like a favorite interview question or something that you look for in people?
I do have a number of favorite interview questions. So the first one, like the easiest one that I really like to ask is asking somebody to explain to me how a system works that they worked on. because it's super simple, right? Like it tells you so much about like the thing that they take pride in, how much that they actually learn about it. And so if somebody can tell me like the network protocol that the different connections are running, like if it was a game server, right? It's like network protocol, why you picked that protocol, the problems with it. If you can go like to this level of granularity, I can tell that you were the person, right? And if you're telling me about high level strategy, and when I dig a little deeper about how these systems actually work, it gets a little iffy. I can tell that you're usually using it to get ahead. And so it wasn't actually your work. So that's my favorite question. And this can range from like, how did the website work to how did the server work? And then I'll just ask a lot of like clarifying questions to make sure that I understand. And then usually I get a good idea of one, how technical the person is, two, how ambitious they are, and three, how deep they go on the things that they work on. And the deeper you go, the better. So that's probably my favorite one. I have a few things that I look for, like if somebody speaks ill of the people they used to work with, it's usually because they're trying to hide something that they did. I've run into this one a few times where somebody comes in and they speak ill of the people that they used to work with. And usually when you check, it's because there was something wrong there. So like I always look at that as like a really big red flag. If they're like trying to not have you talk to the people that they used to work for, if they don't take ownership of the mistakes, like I always ask people to describe their mistakes, and I always ask them what they could have done different and how they respond to that question. Like even if they did nothing wrong, if you're like a humble person and you have like not a massive ego, you can still respond to that question and say, I could have encouraged us to work more as a team by facilitating more of these discussions, for example. Even though your team didn't work well together, it's probably not just your fault, but realistically, there's always something that you could have done better. So the way that somebody actually responds to that very often tells me how they're going to deal with failure. It tells me if they run away from it. For me, if something fails, I want to know everything about it. I am obsessed with why things either work or don't work in this world. And so for me, like a failure is like an opportunity to regroup, rephrase, modify, edit, keep going. And then there's people who look at that and they get really discouraged, and that's fine too. That tells me a lot about the person. And then oftentimes if somebody has and this is controversial, but I look very negatively at people with very short work stints, generally speaking. So startups are hard, projects are hard, people are hard. And I'm not going to invest my time in somebody who I think is going to leave at the first sign of trouble.
Or not be invested in you and metal. Like you want it to be a mutual investment.
It's not even about that for me. I think it's about, because the thing is like, I could really mess up, right? We're really far now, but hypothetically, like 3 years ago, we could have chosen to pivot. I don't really care about that. I care about that you are obsessed with the building for people, right? And that you are able to take a few hits and you have built that like personal environment where you can take those hits. And at the same time, you're not somebody that jumps to the next shiny object. And that's hard because there's like, people pay a lot in tech, right? And so this is something that people do. And I get it. If that's your style, that's your style. But that does mean I'm probably not going to hire you. I'm looking for people who are the builders, who they want to learn how to build things that people want with one of the most unique groups of people that I have ever worked with. And sure, like eventually, after we raised our B and C, that meant like, yeah, we're going to obviously also pay you a lot of money. But initially that wasn't possible, right? So I had to look for those things.
So I guess actually you had a really interesting point about talking about mistakes. I want to flip the question on you. What do you think was the biggest thing you messed up with metal? Like anything you would change if you could go back?
The biggest mistake that I made was overreacting to remote work. And moving everybody remote after we had built an amazing in-person culture. Like if I look at the most destructive thing I've ever did, it was that.
Can you talk us through that?
In remote environments, it's very hard for work environments to be different or unique because in the end, it's like a lot of it is about your connection with people and the problems that you're solving together. And if you're isolated, then the job is just a job. And so you could be working on a really interesting problem, but there's plenty of interesting problems. It's all about the people that you're working on these problems with. What I found is that remotely, the company, Metal, and it started feeling to people like just a job. The second mistake that I made is that I didn't keep the bar high enough for a while. I think as a result of that, being the accepted culture, like my thinking was there's a mass pandemic going. There's like at the time you had Trump in office, there was a lot of political uncertainty. And so I was like, people are just burned out. So this is going to fly over. And so I'm going to like that bar of like intense builders that just like love shipping. I ended up lowering it a little bit because hiring was so hard. Like that's probably the second biggest mistake. You might see them as one, but I think the second is that during COVID, while we were remote, because we wanted to hire, we overhired and we hired people that didn't meet those criteria. We ended up shifting the company back to in person, which was a very obviously painful move. We lost a lot of people. But what I have seen is that culture is back. But I will say that like that probably put the company back. I don't even think it was legal to stay in person, frankly. So, but we should have went back to the office sooner, and we should have spent more time together. And we probably shouldn't have lowered the bar during COVID just to be able to hire people. We should have probably just stayed a little bit smaller for a little bit longer. So we grew to at one point we were 105 people, I believe, in total. And now we're about 45, just for context. And we are doing way more revenue and have way more users than we did during COVID. So if you're optimizing for team, you're optimizing for density and nothing else, right? You're optimizing for the density of the people. And if you find somebody that doesn't meet the criteria, like I've adapted this thing I overheard it from another entrepreneur that said in our culture, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no, which makes it very, very easy to say no to things, right? And so I've really adopted that culture in hiring and everything, that if it's not a hell yes, it's a no.
Yeah. And you had quite a few employees in Europe, right? And you were saying we're going to move in person in New York.
Yeah, so our version of in-person, I would say, is probably a little bit different than other companies. Okay. So at the very minimum, because we do recognize that there are ICs that work remotely, before COVID, we were about 75% in person. My first company, I built 100% remotely, right? But obviously, I was also more like running things by myself. So like there weren't like decision-making was very centralized because it was me making the decisions, right? I think how remote a company can be is directly correlated to the amount of people involved in the decision-making process. The people making decisions need to be in the same room. And by the way, if those decisions need to be group decisions, code decisions usually don't need to be group decisions. Design generally does need to be a group decision. The iteration and the user research, those things you can do this by yourself because they need to directly marry product strategy. And so those things do need to be group decisions. So what we do is we have a rule that if you are a people manager, you have to be in person, no exceptions. And you're in the office 5 days a week. If you are an IC, you're actually allowed to be remote at Metal, but you're spending 10 business days out of every 8 weeks in the office. That's per team. So as a team, you can choose to come in on a Monday, work through the weekend, and leave like mid the next week, or you can spend time in New York on the weekend, do stuff together, which most people tend to do, and then work again the next week. It's kind of up to them. Usually it's a mix. So you have to spend 10 business days every 8 weeks if you're an IC. And this is very good because it keeps the culture. 8 weeks is the perfect period to like keep that culture really, really, really ingrained. And decision makers, you have to be in person. Like it's just a message to the whole company. Like if you want to be involved in making decisions, you have to move. And which also at the same time, it really helps us filter out the people who just want to write code and, and get stuff done versus the people that actually do want to become leaders, right? And so we had this really, really dense culture of leaders and constantly ICs rotating in and out, which is awesome because they have a ton of energy. And as leaders, it's cool because you're constantly spending time with new teams, right? So we rotate teams of ICs in and out.
Oh, you mean like you switch what team you're on inside of Metal?
No, they fly in. So they're 10 business days, right? And they're never there all at the same time. So every 10 days, there's a different team in New York, basically. So as leaders, it's really cool because you're constantly getting fresh context on everything that's going on in the different teams. You're getting exposure. And every 8 weeks, you see the whole company. And those people spend a ton of time in person with you. So for the leaders, it feels like 100% in person because you're 100% in person and you're constantly spending time with the teams. At the same time, if there are ICs that just want to get stuff done, they can do that. They can spend 6 weeks getting stuff done, 10 days in the office with us, making sure the stuff that they're working on is the right thing, having, personal conversations. Also, the thing is that those ICs being close to the decision makers and doing things together is a large part of their motivation because they want to trust the decision makers, right? Yep. And if you don't talk to each other, you don't trust each other. Yeah, this has been our structure for almost a year now, and our culture is like better than it was before COVID. And I think it was because we made such a commitment to spending time in person. Like the truth is that we had tried every other thing. We had tried we had tried career ladders, bringing in excellent VPs from top companies. We had tried semi-annual retreats together. We had tried literally everything to the point where we were like, the problem is remote. And this was before everybody started realizing this. This was in like early to mid last year, right? In 2022. We started like very aggressively moving into like spending more time in person then. And then we pulled the plug on New York because we had a lot of people who are from Europe who work at Metal. And so we were all in LA, but a lot of people from Europe that moved back to Europe. And New York's the place that is most accessible from Europe for traveling because it's a short flight compared to SF or LA.
For the management team, for people that are a little bit more senior, it's 100% in person. But if you're more of an IC, it's like 75% remote, but you still spend a bunch of time in person and get FaceTime.
Yeah, but the 2 weeks are intense. Like they are intense. It's 75%, but we like to think it's more like 60-40. Yeah.
So you describe it as being very much in person, but you still are kind of hybrid. It seems like you found a very interesting kind of sweet spot of
the amount of impact somebody has at a company is not like a 1 to 10 skill. It's like a 1 to 1,000 skill, and perhaps even minus 1,000 to 1,000 skill. And so if you start looking at it like that, in a remote environment, the place where somebody comes in is very often the place where they'll stay. So if they're like, let's say they're a plus 100 and that's on like minus 1,000 to plus 1,000 scorecard. If you're a plus 100, you're probably going to stay at a plus 100. You're maybe going to become a plus 150 because you're going to work a little faster. You know, you might become a plus 180 because like you get a little better. But in person, when you're constantly observing those like founders who are at plus 700, plus 800, that's contagious. And so those people, they go from like 0 to 500 much quicker. And so the way I look at remotes, you can be remote if you're like a 9 out of 10 performer already, and you are already at that point where like you don't meet that. And so like the amount of people that I'm talking about remote is like 20, right? Like in this space. So like we've handpicked the people that are allowed to operate in this structure, and it's very unlikely that we'll hire new people into it. But that's how we made sure that we didn't lose them. So we hire in person, we don't hire remotely, which is why I describe it as an in-person culture, because we only hire in person. But we do have this structure for the people that just couldn't come to New York, because that happens.
We kind of went pretty deep on this remote work throughout COVID. I think you kind of raised a couple rounds sort of during COVID, if I'm remembering right. So you raised the C round, then you raised the Series A. Was that kind of like when it was like working? You had 10,000 clips a day. Was that when the point you're like, all right,
it was 100,000. Series A was 100,000 clips a day.
So are you basically like, all right, people are using this. We need some more money. It's just like pay the bills. Yeah. We need to figure out how to make money like that. How did that all go down?
So our seed was really hard. Our Series A was, I would say, less difficult because we were getting pretty good at fundraising. So we did all our meetings for the Series A at GDC in 2019. And
what's GDC? Is that Game Developer Conference?
It's like the largest. It's like the largest gaming conference of the year.
All the investors were there.
Correct. And so we lined up all the meetings at GDC. We ended up, Josh and I sprinted from meeting to meeting, but we had them lined up, right? Because the metrics were good. And so we did back-to-back meetings, ended up getting 2 term sheets at GDC, one of which we accepted and we're very happy with. So Series A was fairly easy. Series B, we raised right when COVID broke out because I was actually very concerned about the market. There was a period when, so the Series B was mostly like insiders because I was very, like the company was doing really well. And I didn't know that like what would happen with COVID. Like the market crashed, right? And also for context, like I had worked at Dr. Without Borders on Ebola before starting Metal. So my idea of what could happen here was pretty grim. And I think I probably overreacted a bit. And so, yeah, we raised a Series B while things were going extremely well.
That's a good time to raise, though. It's good to raise when you look like a good investment.
Yeah, and luckily we had Makers Fund was on the cap table for us. So they weren't a major stakeholder before, but they really liked us, and so they bought a bunch more of the company in Series B, which was great. Even though they're traditionally not a Series B fund. It was like unusual times. So they did the Series B, and then we raised a Series C from OMERS and Hill House in late 2021, and also Dune, and then the rest was internal as well. We raised about 1 year in between every fundraise up until about late 2021. Which 2 things happened after that is valuations reset, obviously. So it wasn't a great time to raise. And also we turned on revenue. So Like we were in the process of turning on revenue. So we knew that we were going to have to, the company was going to be valued on revenue moving forward, right? So we were doing the very typical like consumer growth play where, you have good retention and you have good organic growth. You don't spend money on marketing. You assume you can make money, but we weren't sure. The other thing is that because we're a video, it's traditionally easy to monetize because it's very, very engaging. I think money for us, like we wanted to push it off because the market was very competitive. Like we spent most of 2021 buying companies and kind of building the good product together. So 2021 was really interesting. Raised our last round late 2021. And then 2022 was like a reset for us. Reset the culture, back to in-person. And then 2023 for us has been growing. Again, like we're basically turning that growth into like a precision work where we know exactly what we're doing, having a culture that we love, having a product that is working and also now monetizing really well, and then figuring out how do you get that to scale as quickly as possible. So we're very much in like the scaling phases now and like less so in like figuring stuff out, which is really nice.
Can you talk much about the monetization? I guess I have a couple ideas in my head about how you might be making money, but
it's very easy. It's subscriptions.
What do people pay for? Like what are you giving them when they subscribe?
So it's $9.99 a month. So you can go from uploads that are 2 minutes to uploads that are 10 minutes. You can download videos without the metal watermark on them. We give you like status symbols around your profile when you're using the product. So you'll like your background on your profile is gold. Your activity shows up gold in the background. And so it's a kind of a combination of a profile status play and utility. And that's going really well. Yeah, we have revenues. So revenue went live July of 2022. And I believe it's grown on average like between 50 and 25% per month since then. Like basically we're now at the point where we're pretty close to being profitable just off subscriptions. We haven't even launched creator monetization. We haven't even launched ads.
David at Dune told me that I had to ask you this question. You had something really interesting. I think you like didn't have a deck or something crazy in either is a Series A or Series B deck. Does that ring a bell? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. But the context here, I believe it was probably the Series B where we didn't have a deck because 1, we were growing really fast. 2, it was COVID. 3, we already had a lead, which makers, we already knew they liked the company.
Yep.
Also 4, I'm extremely consistent with investor updates. So like you can literally go back every month and like read what's going on with the company. It's like my investors, they knew what was going on. So they were ready to commit. So I've raised 2 rounds without a deck. My Series A plus, which was basically after we got our Series A locked in, there were a bunch of people that wanted exposure to the company that we couldn't fit into the A. And I didn't take their money at first because I didn't have a way to use it. And then once we started ramping up paid for a little bit, like end of 2019, we decided that we were going to take that money and put it into paid advertising. And so it was people that had already seen the company that I said no to, that later I went back to and said yes to. So that was a round that I raised off an email. That was $3.6 million. That was my Series A plus because we raised 7.5 in the A. And then we did this one. We did like maybe like 3 to 6 months later, which was pretty cool. It was an uncapped note. It was crazy.
Yeah, it's this disaster for most investors. But
I know, but the cool thing is they did really well because the note ended up converting right when COVID broke out. So it wasn't too far off. And so that was the other round that didn't have a deck, which is where David came in, which MakerSlide, which was because we were already quite consistent. So yes, I know it's a bit of a meme to raise around without a deck, but like, again, I stand by that. Like this whole business, it's all about building trust and maintaining relationships and like doing what you say you're going to do.
You said the deck included a potato house. What does that even mean?
Okay, so this is true. This was technically a strategy appendix. This was not a fundraising deck. This is something that there were people who were interested in around in the Series B that I had sent like an additional like maybe like 10, 15 slides of like my thoughts on the business strategy that they had asked for. So I built this deck that was like Instagram for games has been tried 1,000 times. What you care about as somebody who's sharing these memories is first and foremost your own moments before anyone else's. Like same on Instagram. I would argue, and Snapchat, I would argue that like their biggest secret is that people care far more about their own stuff than they care about everyone else's. So like as a product person, that's where you invest, right? And so we saw the same thing. And so what everybody was doing is they were building these network like companies that were like, upload your video clip. And then we were like, no, you got to go deeply personal by building the capture layer and then expanding from there. So the potato was because my argument was this has been tried a bunch of times. Here are the examples. Here's the competition. I can find more efficient ways to light money on fire. Like, did you know they made houses out of potatoes? And yes, there was a picture of it as well. So it was kind of like a meme-y way of like saying like, this strategy doesn't work. We're going to do something better. But it did definitely made for a memorable deck for sure. I can send it to you after.
And you mentioned you had a bunch of slides about strategy. So how much do you share? Because I know like some people you'll like dig into it, like maybe they're pretty early and they're like they don't want to tell you their vision for the company. Like, is it a good idea to share exactly what you want to build with investors?
The amount of people that can actually do things in this world and like make a vision come true are far more limited than we imagine. The majority of people, frankly, are not occupied with what you're doing. That's like the big myth. There are people that will copy you, don't get me wrong. But in the end, if it's that easy to just copy you as like a network of, like as a company that has skill, they'll do that anyways. So the way that I'm looking at it is everything that you do in startups, it comes down to your own speed and your own merit. And if you're comfortable with your own speed and your own merit and you know you're better than the people you're competing with, then by all means go shout it, right? Like if you don't think that anyone can like do what you're doing and do it better, then share it. We were already at a point where like we realized it was pretty difficult for competitors to go build what we were building. In fact, a lot of them had tried and failed. And so we kind of knew that we were kind of the favorites to win this particular segment of the market already.
And this was like the Series B where you had to hit like a certain amount of scale where it was like...
It was when we turned off paid user acquisition and the company was still growing more than 10% a month. Like that's when we kind of knew that things were just really working. There were a bunch of companies that still tried to go through space after that, that still got funding. And most of them are either doing adjacent like stuff, or a lot of them are pretty interesting. They're focusing on like TikTok capture now. So like the same problem that I described to you, which is that you were capturing off live streams, or you kept basically a lot of the recording software was built for long form recording as opposed to short form recording. All of that is true for like live streaming software still. So like there's now like things like Metal that you can have good short form recording, but for long form recording from live streams and turning that into short form is still really difficult. So like a lot of competitors are now in that space, which is really interesting. Our competition is mostly coming from the larger companies now. Actually, what's funny is you kind of go from like fearing your competitors to fearing your users.
Really?
Which is even more scary. Yeah, because when there's nobody in the space really chasing you, it's very hard to get that same level of urgency behind a lot of the things that you're doing until you look at like your retention data when people hit certain paths in the product where they just quit. So you kind of go from like really worrying about your competitors to really worrying about the problems that you have with your own product and the users. And so it's very refreshing. I think the lesson there is that actually probably should have cared less about competitors and more about those problems in the first few years. I think there was probably at least a year that we spent too much time worrying about the competition. That's probably my third biggest mistake.
So what are examples of maybe places where you didn't focus enough on the customer, or you lost people because you didn't listen to them enough?
Doing video capture is incredibly difficult. So like every PC has different hardware. Different versions of the operating system, different encoders, GPU encoding, CPU encoding, integrated GPU or not. And it has to work perfectly with all these things. Webcam enabled, webcam not enabled, game that you're allowed to inject into to capture the frames versus you have to capture the screen. So there's all these like variations under which the software has to work really well. And I think for a good period of time, we cared too much about the network and too little about like the edge 10% of use cases that need to be supported well. For example, if you think about it, if you're growing 10% less for a year, every single month, that compounds to a lot less than what you could have been. And so I think the lesson there is that like I was probably too fast in a lot of the network decisions and too slow in a lot of the core product quality decisions. Luckily, that didn't lead to us losing our position in the market. You know, we were always quite careful with it, but we could have made more people happy faster if we switched that priority a little sooner.
So what would that have been? Because I guess when I think about what's like the common advice, you know, there's like a Pareto principle. It's like listen to the 80% or the 20% of people that drive 80% of the outcomes. Like some people might say, screw the 10% that you're not hitting. Why was that important?
I take feedback on the product very personally, and maybe that's just me. Maybe here's the thing, right? Metal is my first product that went beyond 10 million people. And so I've never tried running product the other way, right? Like it's too risky for me because I know this thing is working. And so I fear the feedback that my users are giving me and the potential size of those problems because I'm pretty good at quantifying product problems when they're presented. And so it's always hard to take a like non-quantified thing and weigh it against a very quantified problem. So like it's kind of easy to look at it as like a failure. Like in retrospect, I think we could have done both better. But I think the outcome is that social graph and social growth and content consumption started growing like crazy. But at the same time, we have a lot of users now that, for example, have specific problems where we now have like a year worth of recorder backlog that we have to go and solve. So I think if I had done it again and knowing what would have worked, I would have spent a lot less time chasing the high upside social graph connecting in the fear of a competitor coming and wiping us out. And spend more time on those 10% of like recorder people because that's your baseline. We did good, but we could have done better.
So how do you think about iterating on product?
The main thing I would add there on how do you iterate on product is that rapid fire iteration, your speed is everything. And you have nothing until you have retention. Like don't let anybody convince you of anything until you have, if you're a network, more than 20% day 30 retention on the 30th day, and you just iterate until then, and then everything works itself out if you manage to figure out how to grow as well. So, but yeah, iteration is speed. And if you're not shipping every day, then it's probably problematic.
What's kind of the state of metal now? I don't know if I've ever like seen like how big are you guys like publicly? What are you saying?
Yeah, so we have DAU and MAU are single digit millions at the moment, but growing at like same roughly like very consistently same pace since COVID. And as of the last 6 to 12 months, we've really been able to start building that on-platform social graph and content graph so that the use case has become more social sharing versus the capture components. In addition to that, revenue obviously working. So our state is basically we have this base engine that's working really well. Now we're trying to take that into Latin America and Japan and try to figure out how we can replicate that success to get even faster growth. So we have this like baseline engine that's growing steadily in like Europe and the US. And now we're trying to figure out, can we plant that in Brazil? Can we plant that in Japan, et cetera?
And you've gone from kind of this tool to a little bit more and more of a destination that people will visit. It just unlocks more in the business model too of what all you can do.
Yeah, we have this interesting trend, which is kind of like, if you think about what I said at the beginning is that feeds are less engaging than interactive entertainment. What we are seeing, however, is that people are starting to watch more than they play. But that's not necessarily TikTok feeds. A lot of that is like YouTube. And we see it in our own data as well. So like a lot of time, if your friend's playing, for example, that's still interactive and fun. So you'll watch your friend play. What we've seen is that a lot of that trend in the past year is that we're going from a lot of play to a lot of watch, which has been really interesting.
So you guys have acquired, I think you said 6 companies. How do you acquire a company? What's the process? Like if I'm a founder trying to think about it, what should I be thinking about?
Each of them is different. The most straightforward ones are the ones where you need the tech that they have. So we did 2 acquisitions, which was the PC editor and the mobile editor, which were just straight up, we have a very clear goal. This is how much we're willing to pay. And then generally you kind of wait for a point where that company is interested.
And you're kind of paying for R&D, or like you would have had to hire these people to build and it would have taken time.
And once you get a product at scale, like you realize that actually going 0 to 1 on things is really, really hard. And so it's actually much less risky to buy something that has went 0 to 1 and maybe found like mediocre success that you can improve than like try to figure everything out on your own. So we did that with the editor and we did that with the mobile editor as well. So PC and mobile, those were both technical acquisitions. We did another technical acquisition, which was cloud clipping, which is where you basically generate the video, also R&D, like where you generate the videos inside the cloud. Bought the best company at that so that we could go and integrate it into the product.
So that was sort of another R&D.
That was Give Your Game. Yeah, Give Your Game. So yeah, R&D as well. But it was less clear. It was more vision, future. The first 2 is like, we have a problem. We can quantify how much we would pay for it on like time and we'll spend the money or not. Plus we get a really good team, right? That is passionate about this space. We also used the fact that we had raised our Series C, which kind of cemented our position in the market and our growth where most of the other companies weren't growing anymore. We kind of used that to get a lot of those companies on board with us so that they would retain upside in the market, which I spent like 4 to 5 years building in, and they could go do something else, right? So 3 of those companies were kind of that caliber.
So you would give them equity in metal and then they would not have to keep working and they could go.
Correct. 3 of our acquisitions were founders who deeply believed in the space, who we competed with before, who saw that we were very successful and decided that they wanted to join up with us as opposed to continue to compete against us. Like there's Fuse, And like to an extent, there's actually one that we haven't announced. It happened years ago, but they wanted to keep it quiet. That's of the same nature. Those are easy because like you don't have to spend a ton of cash because the founders want to stay long. And as long as the investors are okay with that, they kind of like shift their interests to a different asset. That worked really well for us. Then we've done a few cash deals that were primarily for like talent. Obviously, you give the talent equity, but you got to buy out the cap table. So we've done a few of those. And then, we've done, so every single one of my acquisitions have been like strategic to where I want that to be a part of the product or the roadmap at some point. It's just that like level of clarity was very clear on some and not very clear on others, right? Like Mega Cool, for example, is the B2B clipping. We knew that would be 5 years before we got to it, right? But the team was really good. So it's primarily an acqui-hire, and then we knew that the product would become useful and the knowledge would become useful. Gift Your Game, same thing, 2 to 3 years into the future, but the talent was really good, team was really good. Fuse and this other company that I can't talk about fit in right then and there. We just had to go do it. And then what I learned is like, you can't bet on, like you have to be okay whether or not that acquisition is successful or not, because they take time. And so like the speed of close is really important to your entire org because they need clarity. Are you going to build the thing or we're going to buy the thing? Like look at Microsoft Activision. Like I cannot imagine how hard that was for the people making decisions there, right? Because you either have this thing or you don't.
How long did that play out?
I think it's over a year now.
Okay. And is it like officially, didn't it get like approved or something, like legal review?
Yeah. So I believe they are allowed to close before October 18th or something like that. I think the major hurdles are probably over, but like that just gives you any, like you got to do them quick. That's the other thing that I learned is like good deals happen quickly or not at all. If you don't have velocity behind the process, it's going to fail. You have to see eye to eye with the founders. Obviously, like if it's already like a combative process during the negotiation, it's just not going to work unless you have like $1 billion proven business and you buy another $1 billion proven business. And it's a different story because you're buying a system, not a team and a product. And then each of the acquisitions just have their own nuances. And again, I think for me, everything comes down to its relationships. The thing that I think did really well is that I'm still close with most of the founders that we acquire companies from. And I could call them anytime and ask them a question, right? And they would help. I think the people aspect is very important.
Do you spend time getting to know your competitors, even if it's just like a friendly, like, hey, we should probably just know each other?
So Fuse and Gift Your Game, which were 2 of our competitors, we bought both these companies on the same day. We shook hands on terms on the same day. They didn't know.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I had dinner with the founder of Gift Your Game. And then at 7 p.m., the founder of Fuse texted me that he was interested in selling. And I went to his house. They both in LA. So dinner in Santa Monica with the founder of Gift Your Game. We were already talking. They already knew. So we agreed on terms with them. And then got the text. It was crazy. I told my team about it, and I went and shook hands on the terms for Fuse at like 10 p.m. that night. And the reason was because I already knew these people, right? They knew they could text me. I had never really like positioned myself as like this combative force. I was always kind of there if they needed me, and in a good way, right? Like I wouldn't speak ill of them. I wouldn't make life difficult for them. Like, and we respected each other because we competed, right? That's the other thing that I learned is that you respect your competitors. And like, I'm good friends with a lot of people that I've competed with in the past.
And I think for the audience too, they might not know. I invested in a competitor of Metal before I met Pim, and we're friends now. Like I feel like there's a lot to learn too from competitors also. And again, like they might pivot also, and then maybe you guys are like allies down the road, or you team up and you work together. I feel like there's a lot of ways to approach it.
I think like a competitor relationship is just another relationship. It's just like the timing isn't right, you know?
Yeah. And truly, at the end of the day, if you both become a sustainable business, you have different customers probably. So maybe you compete adjacent in a way, but you're still like you serve probably different customer segments, or one of you won't exist eventually.
Look, as long as you stay like above the belt, product development and getting things adopted by people is like as much of a meritocracy as it should be. You are judged entirely on your results and not in your efforts, which is like the ultimate game, in my opinion. And so that's the thing about competition, right? If they can beat you, it's because you're not good enough. Let's just face it, right? And that's a very like absolute take, but that's the truth. If you're not good enough, it means you have to fix something, right? And so competitors are good because they keep you on your toes. Again, there are things that you can do that are below the belt that you likely won't have a relationship, but I mean, most companies don't do that.
All right, let's jump into rapid fire. So do you have a favorite CEO that you really look up to or that you've learned a lot from?
Elon Musk pre-2023, I would say.
So this was before he went down this interesting path with Twitter.
Okay, it went from real interesting and relatable to real interesting but less relatable real quick. And I think his style is very, very interesting. Let me put it this way.
Okay.
I really liked everything he did up until the point where he started messing with the things that I knew a lot about and I knew they were the wrong decisions.
Yeah.
Which is when I started thinking that there were maybe a few weaknesses to his approach as well. I admire everything he did. And then there were a few things that he did in 2023 that when it comes to people and when it comes to products, I know taking a slower approach is better. He would still probably be my number one pick if it was like a CEO I looked up to, but I wish he slowed down a little bit sometimes.
Do you like his commitment, passion, vision?
Dedication to the mission, willingness to get in the weeds, not being afraid of being contrarian and people pleasing or caring about optics. What he did with Twitter really was the beginning of a great reset in tech when it comes to expectations and work ethic, frankly. The thing that I really like about him is that he leads with big missions, which allows people to buy into big missions and solve big problems, despite him not necessarily being there for everything. And so I think leading with a big mission is just really, really important if you're going to do a big company. He did this with Tesla and Neuralink, Boring. So I think there's just a playbook that is very, very respectable to me. And then the means of executing it sometimes have question marks. But I think the basis I really respect.
Favorite game? What are you playing right now?
Rocket League.
Rocket League. I feel like you've played that for a long time.
It's one of those games where I got to a place in the ranked ladders that I'm just so consumed by it that no other game comes close in terms of how it engages me.
Just to explain Rocket League super quickly for people, it's soccer, but you have a car that you instead of a person, it's a car, basically.
Yeah,
and
but it goes really, real deep.
And they're the physics are very interesting, right? Where the way it all bounces and moves. Yeah. Okay. And it's an enclosed course, right? And you can drive up the sides.
Exactly. There's so much to it. It's such a simple game, but there's so much depth to the mechanics and play styles that I could play for a very long time. It gets very tiring because very high paced, but it's amazing.
Awesome. Well, speaking of amazing, this was a great conversation. Thanks for coming on. Yeah. Hopefully people learned something. I feel like we went deep on a lot of interesting topics. So thanks again for joining. Thank you for tuning into The Peel. A lot of takeaways from Pim, especially for those of us who grew up playing video games online. If you want to support the show, the best ways as always are to leave a review wherever you're listening, comment, subscribe on YouTube, give us a shout out on Twitter or in your own newsletter, and share this with one friend who might like it. If you don't want to miss an episode, subscribe to the newsletter in the show notes and you'll get new ones in your inbox the moment they drop. Thanks again for listening and see you next time.